Hey, folks, wanted to welcome you to the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, where we are talking to educators from all over about technology and pedagogy and just all sorts of great topics. And today's guest I know is going to be a great one because he brings sort of a different perspective into the classroom than one that I'm seeing in a lot of places. And it sort of has to do with, well, you know what, we're going to get into this. I don't want to spoil the surprise too much, but he does have a fantastic podcast that I know you definitely want to check out called Started Up. And I love the name of it because it's kind of a blend of startup and education. And that's really, I think, sort of the essence of what we're going to be talking about all of these lessons that we can get from the startup community and startup culture that could really tie into education and make it more relevant to kids and their future. So I want to turn it over to Don Wettrick. So Don, can you tell everybody just a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Don Wettrick, and I teach an innovation and open source learning class, which that's a long explanation in of itself. But yeah, basically, if people are familiar with like Genius Hour, 20% time, it's that, except it's the entire class. I mean, it's completely student driven. The actual class is about 7 weeks long, and then the rest of the year it's driven by them in a kind of a Genius Hour format. So this is my 7th year doing this class, and it's been fun because I think we started it to where it was confusing and it seemed stupid to a lot of people. And since that there's been kind of this revival of 20% time or whatever you want to call it, then I think that it's been kind of unique because people are like, oh, well, this makes sense. This is obvious. So it's gone through that transformation.
Yeah. And, I've heard Don talk in person, face to face, but also on various podcasts and videos and stuff about this class. And it's just sort of phenomenal what his kids have been able to do. Well, actually, I mean, I shouldn't think of it as that phenomenal, because whenever you turn kids loose on things that they're passionate about, they can do amazing things. And I think we don't give kids the opportunity and the credit to do that enough. And, I mean, from the events that his kids have put on to, there are apps and products and patents and, just amazing things that have come through this course where kids are just kind of like given the opportunity to get into a topic or a thing that they want to pursue, and they get an expert that's kind of like their mentor, and then they can just kind of like dig into it and learn lessons from failing and from succeeding and from, trying things a different way. And before we jump into the meat and potatoes of this conversation, Don, can you like brag on your kids a little bit and tell us just a little bit about some of the stuff that's come out of this class?
Sure. You kind of mentioned it. The past couple of years, we've had some patents filed from the class. We've had businesses started. We've had blogs. We've had podcasts started from that class. And actually, I think most notably here recently, 2 of my students are starting a school in Ghana. And when I mean starting a school, they're not like raising money for somebody to do it. They're doing it. One of my students is moving out in January to Ghana. And then the other one is staying back here to run it sustainably. He already set up he's already actually got his articles of organization. They're a 501c3 now. They're official NGO. It's spectacular. But other than that, we've got a student that just invented his own board game to teach economics and entrepreneurship in the classroom. It's just, yeah. And those, literally, and sometimes there's like big sexy things, but then there's like some projects that are like really meaningful to them, and it may not necessarily grab headlines, but that's what they wanted to learn and that's what they focused on. And so I'm equally as proud of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite ones. See, I keep wanting to like geek out about this class too, because, I've heard so much about it. I kind of feel an ownership to it from afar. But one of my favorite ones was how one of Don's students found out that the local farmers market wasn't able to sell to people who were on government food programs or something. And so she set up this program where they could both work together. And she actually designed this little wooden token that people could use to go buy money at the farmer's market. I mean, it was just amazing from start to finish, and it had to have had such a big impact on those families.
Like the most is that they use school resources. I mean, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but sometimes we'll get these really great, wonderful tools, and it will be used for a class project, and that's it. And so she used a really nice, she got a micro grant, bought balsa wood, and she created her own unit of monetization by using her laser engraver. So I mean, literally, we could do a 3-hour show on some of the things that have come out of the class. I'm just literally off the top of my head. So
right. Yeah. And see, the idea for me for this interview is to get into some of the stuff from your podcast. But like I said, I was just going to do like a quick couple minute thing, and I keep going, oh yeah. And then there's this one thing you have to hear. Oh, and then there's this other thing you have to hear. So yeah, but to kind of transition over to that, Don has done this amazing podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts actually, it may be my favorite podcast in education right now, if you can even call it in education.
Right.
And
yeah.
It's kind of like on the borderline there. And right. I highly, highly recommend anybody that's watching this to go check it out. If you go look on iTunes or in, any Android podcast app that you've got, you just search for Start Ed Up, just all one word, Start Ed Up, and you'll find it. And Don, can you tell us just a little bit about the impetus behind this podcast?
Yeah, it was almost a year ago to the day we started. So part of the class is I want you to reach out to other people and learn from other people than me, because if you have an unlimited amount of things you want to learn from, and it's something out of my realm, you're not going to learn from me anymore. So again, that first 6 or 7 weeks, it's that formal class kind of, and then the rest of the year, it's open source learning. And so one day, we were reaching out to people, and I still do this. And we have a week where we kind of focus on them and their social media etiquette and who they want to reach out to. And we kind of almost have we incentivize people that start getting feedback from people. And so we got a hold of Tim Ferriss, and people listening to this right now might go, who is that? The inventor of the Ferris wheel? And some people might go, oh my gosh, Tim Ferriss. And it was that, oh my gosh, Tim Ferriss is what reaction I had. And so I sent out an email, because to get him to come out to speak to your event it's in 6 figures. And so I was like, hey, does anybody want to come down and talk to Tim Ferriss? It's open. And I mean, I don't blame people here, but no one knew who Tim Ferriss was. Like a couple people knew who Tim Ferriss was. And I was like, are you kidding? So we kept interviewing really interesting people from the classroom. And then the thought occurred to me, why am I not recording this? And it actually reminded me of Tom Bilyeu's show. I was on Tom Bilyeu's show a couple years ago, and he started Inside Quest because he was wanting to interview all these great people and then have his employees listen to it. So if they couldn't be there in person, they could listen on the podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, that's the same thing I should do. So I started sending out some feelers of people that either we had interviewed before or we wanted to interview. And then we started getting a lot of feedback, because it turns out the people that really understand my class aren't necessarily people in academia, but they're sure as heck are entrepreneurs. They really get what we do. And so I'm not saying that all my guests are entrepreneurs. That'd be a fallacy, but a great deal are. And so little by little, we started reaching out to people, and it's just been a whirlwind of awesome, because these guys are learners, and they're not too, and sometimes they're not very subtle on their displeasure with some traditional education. So that's why I hesitate to call it an educational podcast, because sometimes they rip into it, but it's always kind of a wake up call, and it's sometimes brutal honesty that we need to hear. But I will say, if people are checking it out, the first, in my opinion, the first one you should check out is episode 2. Jeff Hoffman's words of wisdom, still I'm not going to do spoilers, but there is no they, was among the most inspiring stories. And Jeff is a really good guy. He co-founded Priceline.com, among other things. But yeah, so anyway, so I started gleaning wisdom from the podcast, and I'm not going to lie. I thought I'd start off and I'd have one a week, and I'd be lucky if I got one a week. And then it just kind of exploded to where, I'm getting a lot of books sent to my house and people asking to be on the podcast. And then it's awkward because sometimes they don't fit at all. I'm like, no, I appreciate it. But it's been so cool to like get to know some of their insights, get to know their mindset. And so, yeah, we're going to kind of dig into that. So yeah, start off with Jeff Hoffman. There is no they.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And then you might want to go just to like bookend it. You might want to go straight to, oh man. And I know that you know this. I took a lot of guff that I had on Tucker Max. And for the record, years ago, I had read one paragraph because I heard several people talk about how hilarious this book was. Well, I was raised a little differently, and I don't find anything he did funny. And so I put the book down, and I think I even said, what an a-hole. And he was. I think he was the first. Well, I mean, heck, his book is called Assholes Finish First. And hope they serve beer in hell. Anyway, you probably get the point of the books. And so he's a lot different person now. And the other thing is I'm a podcast junkie. Like I consume a lot of podcasts. I like learning that way. And so I'd heard him on James Altucher. And I was like, wow, what a unique guy. And so his podcast with me was how he learned how to cheat, how he learned how to beat the rules, how he despised school but loved learning, and how he's going to homeschool his son because he doesn't want him to be subservient. So it's brutal, man. But I particularly loved it.
Yeah. And that's the thing that you get some. It's just like what you said, when you get some of these people on here, they have these not always scathing like views on education, but they're very honest, I think. And it's a different perspective than what we get from classroom teachers and from administrators and even from parents and all of that. It's a whole different perspective. And I think it's something worth hearing, of course. Now I know you said jump in with Jeff Hoffman, and that's interesting because while we've been chatting, I've been kind of like making a short list of the episodes that I wanted us to touch on. Yeah. And I put the Travelocity guy on there, and then I looked back at the list. I was like, oh yeah, that's right, that's Jeff Hoffman. And I have to tell you, I remember the moment that I listened to that episode. I was driving in the car, and I got out to get some gas. And while I was doing that, I actually sent him a text, not a text, I don't have his phone number, a tweet. And so I just looked it up, and I said, Jeff, inspired by your Started Up interview with Don Wettrick, ready to hand out some shovels. Yeah. So, and I know that, I know you said, I don't want to give away any spoilers or anything, and you can tell me no on this, like right here in the middle of the interview, that's fine. Sure. But I'm hoping maybe you will a little bit, give people some of the best stuff so that they see the kind of thing that they're coming into. So can you tell them a little bit about what he was talking about there? Yeah, I mean, on one of the stories, and there were several, so I mean, it's still worth a listen. But yeah, on one of the stories, Jeff had made quite a bit of money. And he said all of a sudden his friends turned on him and people were jealous, and he was sitting around feeling sorry for himself. And he was watching the evening news, and he lived there in Baltimore, and conditions in Baltimore, depending on the city, aren't great. And so he was watching the news, and there's this thing about a battered women's shelter that's going to shut down because there was no funding. The women had to find a place to live. They had like 30 days. And so Jeff said, and again, he was feeling bad about himself now that he was wealthy. And he said, boy, somebody ought to do something. He said, no, they should do something about that. And he was watching this on the news, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was watching this. Yeah. Boy, they should do something about that. And then all of a sudden he's like, wait, there is no they. There's me. I have money. I've been blessed with money. And it came suddenly. I mean, he had done a lot of hard work, but things were right, and he'd all of a sudden had done well. And all of a sudden he's realizing, and he says, I have a plaque to this day on my wall. There is no they. When everybody else says, boy, somebody should do something, there is no somebody. There's you. And everybody will fall in line if you do it. But if everybody else complains about it, then it's just everybody else. So that story hit me like a wrecking ball. No, that story hit me, and I was like, wow. And he's got, and if you follow this guy on Twitter and especially LinkedIn, he's going all over the world. Like I think right now he may be in Sri Lanka, but he's going all over the world, fostering pockets of innovation and entrepreneurship. I felt bad because even on the show, he's like, every other year they have this large boat and they get off on sections of the world that aren't great, and their job is get off the boat and do something, start something amazing, start an entrepreneurial venture. And he's like, and you're going to be on that next boat. And then I was like, okay. And off air, I'm like, I have 3 kids and that's never going to happen. And I, would be honored to, but I can't do that. But but God bless this guy. I mean, he's going all over the world in not great parts without necessarily fanfare, just doing stuff. So I love the guy. I mean, there's little pockets of that. I mean, even in things that weren't necessarily like the big sexy stories. Like I like the one with Jordan Gilbert. He's explaining. Actually, you shouldn't say this. He's very popular and very famous on the esports side. But Jordan had this show, I think it was like episode 7 or 8, and he was talking about the explosion in esports. And at the time, I didn't know much about it, and that's going to be a huge explosion in the education movement, in my opinion. I like picking out things that what he was saying. Well, actually, I should turn it back to you. Like, what other episodes stand out in your mind?
Oh yeah. I think we definitely have to talk about the Seth Godin episode. It was fascinating to hear you and Seth. First of all, Seth Godin is kind of like, I'm kind of a fanboy when it comes to Seth Godin. In fact, here, I know, I can't see him right now. I should have been prepared. There is at least one Seth Godin book on there, and then there's a couple more in my Kindle. And if you have never heard of Seth Godin before, it's really easy to get a hold of or to find out about him. All you have to do is go to a Google search and type in the word Seth, S-E-T-H. He's that big, and he has fascinating ideas about business, but also about education. And it was great.
Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Well, that was one of those episodes that I co-hosted with Hunter. Hunter is my co-founder and former student, and he didn't know it hit him. Like it was a bit intimidating because like Seth he's got strong opinions, and I loved that episode, and it challenged me because I thought I was pretty militant about some things, and he's like, no, you're not going far enough. I think maybe my most poignant moment with him though is like right before we logged off, and he said, hey, I want you to do an experiment with your class. And I said, okay, what's that? And by the way, again, you should listen to this whole episode because it's amazing. He said, make sure everybody's in person. He says, tell your students, all right. He says, if I were to arm you with like $10,000 at your church or your group or your class, or anybody in this room right now, write down the 3 names that you trust that everything would get executed and the money would be spent wisely and things would get off the ground. He says, and so everybody would write down their name. And he says, okay, is your name on that list? And if it's not, when are you going to start acting like the 3 names on the list? And I did that in my class. And the thing is, everybody without fail all put the same 3 names. And I asked the people who 2 of the 3 names, everybody put down. And I asked those 2 students, I'm like, did you put your own name? And they're like, well, yeah. I mean, like they knew that they were trustworthy. They knew that people were going to count on them. And so I asked other people, I'm like, why isn't your name on there? And it was gut check time. And I thoroughly appreciated it because it put people on notice that, this is a classroom where you are, I mean, you're allowed to do, but you're also allowed to not do. I'll nitpick at you and I'll grade you accordingly. But Seth cut to the quick. And I mean, what a simple little thing he did at the end. But I thoroughly love that. But warning, if you are a fan of traditional education, you are not going to like that episode. I mean, he was strongly opinionated. But again, I loved it. I loved it. So then, and I got a little feedback on that on some people that had never heard of him and they didn't like it. And also with the Nick Gillespie one. Nick Gillespie is a little L libertarian, according to him on his Twitter profile, but he is the editor of Reason Magazine and Reason TV, and it was a episode on school choice. If you ever want to start getting people fired up on both sides, talk about school choice. And Nick was pretty poignant about the fact that, in his opinion, not allowing school choice and not allowing people to choose is wrong. And we went over to like, well, what if that choice were to hurt the public school system? He's like, if the public school system is so awesome, no one's going to choose the other side. And so it was well thought out and a really good episode. But again, one that I learned from, and one that I got a lot of feedback from. Some nice, some not.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. And, you look at those couple of topics, those couple of guests, and I think you're right. There have been a handful of guests that you've had that would probably ruffle the feathers of some people who are, like you said, in favor of traditional education. But I don't know about you, but I feel like if I'm not listening to some of that stuff or reading some of that stuff sometimes, then I am stuck in my safe little box. And that's a dangerous place to be, especially when you consider that in education, we're talking about the future and the lives of, hundreds of kids in our care every year. If you count the ones that are in your class, but also the ones that you are able to impact and touch in the school too. And, I know that you've been a big proponent of just widespread school change, and you're doing it within this one class. And I think this is something that we've got to continually revisit, and to hear things like this from people in the real world who are successful, who we might not hear from otherwise. That's something that we've got to do, I think.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because that is the reason why I started it. And when you said we're sometimes in our own bubble, and look, I think that's why sometimes people even get conferenced out. We hear the same mantras, and these are nice. Well, why not we hear from a person that got C's and D's in school yet is wildly successful? Why don't we hear from those people? And yeah, they do challenge my thinking, even if I might disagree. I still want to hear it. And I'm not going to soapbox this too long, but I think we're now also living in a culture where if it offends me, then it must not be heard. And I'm like, no, what is that? I think it's a Mae West quote was like, people that are easily offended need to be offended more often. I'm in that camp. Yeah. Like if I have you on as a guest and you tell me everything I want to hear, it's not okay. I'm not challenged. So I enjoy a good challenge every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the interview you had with Dan Pink. Because I love Dan Pink. Drive. I know when I heard his TED Talk, I heard an audio version of it, and I was driving, and I actually had to, because if you've never seen that TED Talk before, Dan Pink talks about the three, the heart of motivation comes down to these three things: mastery, autonomy, and choice. Mastery is getting good at something. Purpose. Autonomy is, is it? Oh yeah, it's not choice, it's purpose. Where did I come up with choice? Mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Thank you. Yeah. So mastery is getting good at something. Autonomy is having the freedom to pursue something. And purpose, that is exactly the one, is the pursuit of something bigger than yourself.
Right.
And I had to stop the car, pull it over, and I was like writing furious, copious notes, and my mind was spinning, and I didn't need to be driving at that moment. And I love the focus on that, and how we get motivation wrong in the classroom a lot. So what do you remember about that?
Well, it was kind of a fanboy moment as well, because his TED Talk 7 years ago is what started my class. It's what I approached the principal with. And he said, well, if you can find Dan Pink on the course catalog in this state, then I can get it approved. And so, I heard yes. And if it weren't Dan, and then Dan was nice enough to Skype into my class and then do a little bit of convincing. So part of it was kind of a thank you. And I also I wanted him to be later in the show because I knew I could count on him. So it was a thank you letter. But then, he goes into the fact that he wasn't quite aware that I personally think that he's the godfather of 20% time in schools. But then he was even going over, cognitive biases and some of the things that, his new book is, well, he didn't go into what his new book's going to be about too much, but just him on what motivates people. And then that TED Talk is what motivates employees, but really it was also what motivates students, except our unit of monetization is grades. And so we talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That one was amazing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's land this real quick with we've got the podcast that people can go check out and everything. If people are into this and they want more of it, where are some places that you think they can go?
Yeah, I mean, other than the Start It Up podcast, we also have a Facebook page where just about every day I post a 3 to 5 minute video. You pop in one.
Right.
And so because a lot of people are like, hey, what goes on in that room? Well, we want to show you. So there's that. And actually, oh, look, class is about to start. So I need to wrap it up. But that, and I'm really excited. We're doing a partnership with Twitch. And you're going to see a new channel called The Innovation Teacher. And it's going to be a streaming channel that we have on Twitch. Oh, right. Hold on. I got to do the pledge.
Okay. All right. We're going to pause for the pledge here for just a second. While Don's doing that, I think I'm not interrupting his class when I'll continue on to say that Don also has a great book called, just blanked on the name.
Pure Genius.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. Pure genius. So if you're interested in this whole idea of genius hour and 20% time and how it can fit into schools and into your classroom, that's a great place to go too. Don, you've got to go teach.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Actually, if you know what, I'm going to wrap this up by giving you Luke Rex because he'll tell you about his school. Because I probably shouldn't make this a podcast anyway. So I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna let these last 3 or 4 minutes be with Luke and Matt. I appreciate you. Appreciate all that you're doing. Appreciate you pushing out good in the world. And honestly, a lot of people already watching this already know this. You were a good person, and I appreciate you. There's not a lot of, I'll stop there. You're a good person. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. All right. And as he goes and gets Luke, I have to say that Luke is and there's Luke right there. I'm going to say real quick, I've met Luke face to face. He was at an education conference that I went to where Don and he were the co-keynotes. And so Luke I'm glad that Don has just shifted this over. So Luke, are you awake? Are you doing all right this morning?
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit, but it's all right. Just got to school. It's all good. I'm awake.
All right. Very good. Good to see you again. And so can you tell me a little bit about I think this is the reason that Don's shifted it over to you. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're up to? I know I was listening to you on Anchor there for a little while. I need to go get that. I switched phones and I lost it or something, but yeah, tell me a little bit about what you're doing in Don's class.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of just go back to the start. So there's a former student, Pete Freeman, who came into the class. He's a Lilly Scholarman, graduate from Noblesville, crazy awesome guy. He's out doing some awesome things. But he came into the class and he's like, hey guys, I've been gone a couple times. There's this plot of land and there's this guy named Kobe and he wants to build a school, but I can't do it. So another friend, Luke, we've been friends for years. We looked at each other and we're just kind of like, all right, we need to do this. So we took that on, we fundraised, we worked out a lot of different kinks, but the thing that was missing was just the sustainability factor. So we kind of went off the mission trip mentality and the mission trip idea of like, we don't want to just go and drop off school supplies and leave. That's cool, that's great. I've done it several times in Kenya, but I just want to do more. So he focused more on the fundraising and I focused more on the sustainability factor. And what I'm doing now is I actually created a nonprofit. I actually just got registered like this week. So that's pretty awesome. But with the nonprofit, we're going to be doing what we're doing in Ghana, but just all over the world. So the next project actually might be in Kenya. I'm actually scouting out some more land there with one of my friends and looking to purchase that soon. But the thing about this school is that we are encompassing it around community. At Noblesville, I'm blessed to have the community that I have, and that's what these kids are also missing. So, and I mean, everywhere you go, the community is like built off of a school, and the communities around the world just don't have that. So, Luke and I, we're really combining a lot of different things that we just have in common. We love helping people, we love traveling, and we just made a project about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So to kind of bring this into the teachers that are going to be and the other educators that are going to be seeing this, what is it in general in this class that you're taking that you get that you aren't getting from a lot of those traditional classes that is important but is still sort of like missing?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the biggest thing is just I'm getting the opportunities that I wouldn't be getting in my other classes. And what I mean by that is I'm not getting the opportunity to explore like the boundaries of like kind of like the outside world, what's outside of this classroom. I'm not getting the opportunity without innovations to meet people like Pete, to meet people like Kobe and Ghana to build a school. It's really, I just see I'm not getting those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so the follow-up question here is, if your other teachers, and I know that like not every class can, pull a bunch of the stuff in from the innovations class. I mean, it's, that's just sort of the way that school is. But if your other teachers, if like every other teacher in your schedule was watching this video right now, or, you're obviously talking to a bunch of other teachers that are going to be seeing this. What are things just from your perspective as a student, what are some things that they could do differently that your innovations class does well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing I understand with different classes, you have to meet a certain criteria. You have to teach specific things in science. You have to teach specific things in math. So I understand that it's very hard to incorporate the Genius Hour into it, but there's just little elements you can put into it, even as small as open discussion. I mean, a lot of my classes at Noblesville do not involve open discussion, which I mean, for me is very hard because I love talking to people. So, but I mean, that's just one simple thing that I've actually seen incorporated into my English class. Because I mean, I have innovations and then I go to English, and I'm always working like sometimes, not always, but I'm always working like in here. I'll work the same in English. So the teacher has like noticed that, transition to it, and it's working out great for everyone. But I mean, open discussion as well as I would say connecting with other people. Even with like math stuff and everything, I would learn way better from a professional or a professor, just kind of like seeing how hard he is on it. And I've actually tried to do that. I'm bad at math, so it just didn't work out. So, yeah. But I would say those couple of things. I mean, that's the easiest way to, I would say, integrate a Genius Hour or a type of innovations class within your curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are things that are, I mean, reachable to teachers. They're things that they can go and do,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. All right. We got to let Luke get going. I just saw all of the, students behind him pick their stuff up and take off. So we better let him go. So Luke, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.